Good to see you again, and welcome back to series number 2, in which, in case of me just wandering, waffling around and telling you the history which I have learned over the last 8 years, definitely, but not as one who can tell it to you themselves. So we're going to explore our history in a bit more depth with some remarkable people. And one of those remarkable people I would like to introduce you today, and he's right at the top, I have to tell you. Welcome, Chief Nthlanthla Ndiweni.
Thank you very much for the welcome into your broadcast today. I'm delighted, I'm pleased indeed. Yes.
Well, it's wonderful, of course, to have you with us. And what I would like to do today is to just go right back in your family, because you're so close to the Khumalos. And also, I had heard or read somewhere that Shaka's mother was Ndiweni. Was that correct? And can we start there?
That was Ziviga's mother was Mandweni. So then the Ndweni family and the Khumalo family intertwined, and they even came into the King Lobengula's circle as well. So we are thick and intertwined as a family.
Okay, so was she part of from the Black Mfolozi area? Was that where she came from, where you all came from?
It's the Black Mfolozi area, but if we're looking at the Ndweni clan itself, the Ndweni clan is from the amaNdebele clan. Mm-hmm. The amaNdebele clan is intrinsic in the Zulu nation. It comes from right deep in a place called Enchenteka. Its modern day term is Vryheid. Vryheid, KwaZulu-Natal. That is where we come from, the amaNdebele clan. And the amaNdebele clan was under, and still is under, the current king of the amaNdebele, that's King Shosho Mangete.
Right.
So the amaNdebele clan are part and parcel of the Zulu nation. The Ndweni clan is part of that. So you're looking at an inner core, sort of interwoven into the Zulu nation coming through.
Okay.
That's right.
Is there any link then to Bulalima Mangwe?
Yes, that's part and parcel of the story as well. Because if you look at what's happening in Zimbabwe and everything there, you will notice that right away from Plumtree, that whole area there, you will follow through. And it will look like coincidence, but it's not. You will find Ndweni chief after Ndweni chief after Ndweni chief.
Wonderful.
You will start at the Black Hills in Plumtree, Zinyameni, Chief Wasi. Yeah. You progress further, you come to Chief Mpini. You come further up there, and you come across more chiefs as you come in, Chief Nyangazonke. And then you come over to myself, Chief Ndweni. You go further to Dubai, Chief Ngalagata Ndweni. So the Ndweni chiefs, were originally 12.
Right.
We currently have 6. Okay. But there were 12 because the monarch said, these are my uncles, they will protect me. So because I have this issue with Shaka Zulu, let me put my chieftains in between myself and Shaka Zulu, so that should he come at me, he won't get far, because he'll be buffeted with the Ndweni chief after Ndweni chief after Ndweni chief.
Ah, wonderful. That's a great way, great bit of thinking. He was an incredible strategist, Mzilikazi, wasn't he?
He was profound. He was absolutely profound logistically, the whole works. And Jill, the main thing really that people sometimes forget is that he was a nation builder. Because had he not been a nation builder, a lot of local languages and cultures and customs would have disappeared. Yes. But here we are, 2020. You look at the Ndebele nation, it's a cosmopolitan mix of many nations within itself. That shows strategy.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So here we have him. He got beaten a couple of times by Shaka, having decided not to return his cattle. And you can imagine Shaka's fury at that.
Yes.
But having had that, he went off, I understand, to sort of, it looks like the sort of bottom of Mozambique, to kind of recover and build the clans and the tribes up again before he started through into the northern Transvaal. Is that roughly right?
Yes, that's roughly right there. To say that's how he went, purely because he was looking for a route to say, where can he go with his people? Where can he go with the band of people that he's got together? And really from that southern part of Mozambique, traversing horizontally as if he's cutting the southern part of Africa in half, you will note when you follow the footsteps, the local tribes that he came across all have a story to tell. Some of them, they are still fermenting with anger to say, this madman, Mzilikazi, he came in and cut us in half, the whole through that way around. So, I mean, if I can give you an anecdotal thing, I was in amaNdebele, which is in Mpumalanga there, amongst the Ndebele nation in South Africa. And their king was there, we were together, Inkosi Nthlanthla, the king of the Ndebeles in South Africa. So we were chatting away and I was saying, well, Lapa Nkosi, we're in the process of resurrecting the king of the Ndebeles in Zimbabwe. And he said, Chief Ndweni, I am the king of the Ndebeles. Who is this you're trying to raise up? I said, no offense.
Wonderful. Well, there are hundreds of stories about the savagery of the amaNdebele and things as they went through the Mfecane and northern Transvaal.
Yes.
Mainly, it was necessity. When you look at any country, or you look back at Britain, you look at the Romans, the Danes, whatever,
Yes.
the whole process of conquering tends to be a fairly brutal one in those initial stages until it's all established. But the one thing that comes across so strongly is the discipline of the amaNdebele people. And I think that is a factor even today with everything that's happened.
Yes. You are right, Jill. Really, I suppose people shouldn't put fluffy woolen gloves when looking at this whole historical event. This is real conquest right from the way back, whereby you either engage, you either clash, you either fight, or you are wiped out or you are assimilated. So that is how it was in those days, and that is how they're going through there. But the difference, the thing that which we touched on earlier on, was that both Mzilikazi and Kondwani Ndweni, when he was going on the other side of the Limpopo, they were both mindful that we need to build our nation. We need the numbers.
Yes.
We need the numbers. We need men folk in our regiments and all of that. So it wasn't as brutal, as vicious as others would have it. No. There was a thought process in it. And that's why really was building up nations as it went along. And when he was leaving that area, southern part of Mozambique, he left a group there to proceed going up that way under Soshangane. That's why even today you have the Shangane nation in Triangle, in Chiredzi. They are still there. I went with them, and yes, the Chief Mlilos are there, and they are part of us. So the Shangane nation is well and good in that whole little enclave. Mzilikazi proceeded, licking his wounds and building up his nation with the full knowledge that at some point in time, he would engage Shaka Zulu again.
Yes, absolutely, which he did. Now, okay, so Mzilikazi himself, I gather, crossed the Limpopo in about 1838. But he asked your great-great-grandfather, uncle, I'm not sure of that relationship, Godwani Ndweni, to take the remainder across the Limpopo. Now, how on earth did he manage that huge number of people? How did he go about sorting out those who were already there? And how did he go about issuing the land to the chiefs? Lots of questions.
Kondwani Ndweni was a confidant of Mzilikazi. uncle of Mzilikazi, so posed absolutely no threat to the throne whatsoever. An uncle actually bolsters the throne. So that is why Mzilikazi could do such a thing, with the full knowledge that the throne was not in jeopardy, and with the full knowledge that the house of Kumando was not in jeopardy. Because this was an uncle who had a vested interest in maintaining it.
Okay.
Khondwane Ndweni then led that nation, that part of the nation that Mzilikazi gave him. It was possibly 80% of that nation to go further with that. While Mzilikazi continued in his trajectory heading towards the Zambian side, that side there where he left Mpezini and the others there to look for this particular place that he'd been told about, a flat, open veldland with a singular flat top mountain, and on the other side of this flat top mountain, two mini little outposts. They were looking for Indaba Zinduna.
Okay.
They were not aimlessly wandering. They had been given the description of Indaba Zinduna to say, you will come across a flat top hill on its own in the veldland, and on either side of this hill, you will have two round mini hills. So it was specific. It was not aimless wandering. It was specific on the nail to say, go and find this place. That is where you'll have your nation. So we're looking at a story really for those who like historical things. This is Excalibur in an African way, where all sorts of things happen.
An exit.
But yes. So Khondwane Ndweni led the nation. He had a couple of battalions with him, obviously to defend the whole group as it went by. It was a methodical walk because he had all the women there, the cattle, the livestock, the whole things with it. And as he proceeded as well, he was also too assimilating nations into the group as well, as he proceeded with that thing. So once again, that is coming through. And Mzilikazi did not do it by genuine fluke. Khondwane Ndweni is an amaNgwe. The amaNgwe clan have been vested with the interest of good governance. That is what we are. When you look at it, Ndweni, put him as a bureaucrat. That is what flows in my blood veins. We are bureaucratic people, so that was within his forte, to manage, to govern, to lead. So that was part of it. And he led them right the way through until he came across the flat top mountain first. And he said, yes, I have found it. It is here. And it is from Indaba Zinduna that then they began to apportion off the land that was there, to say, okay, so-and-so can be there, so-and-so can be there, so-and-so can be there. Governance and really rule of law, central to that.
Absolutely. All right. So now then, what happened to Khondwane? Because Mzilikazi went up towards the Zambezi and he got held up by the Makololo, I gather, and he didn't go back for 2 years. So in the meantime, everybody was saying, well, what about the Nkwala? How are we going to throw the spears? There's no king here. That was all prelude to what happened at Indaba Zinduna. But what happened to your great uncle? Did he survive?
The great uncle, Khondwane Ndweni, he led that half of the nation to Indaba Zinduna. And obviously, he had to sort of control them as they were there, appease them as they were there. The monarch was not there. But in the process, as life would have it in the process, his wandering eye roved a little bit. And when his wandering eye roved a little bit to some of the ladies, the fair ladies in the palace there, one became with child by him. So Khondwane Ndweni, at some point in time, when Mzilikazi was coming there, he did the honorable thing. And he ran into his assegai. He ran into his spear to say, I have done something wrong here, which jeopardizes the royal house. So I need to remove myself from that so that at least the monarchy remains intact as it is.
Wow. Okay. Well, Okay, so I hadn't heard that part of the story. Um, what happened to Nkuluman? Do you have any further insight into Nkuluman? What happened to him?
Nkulumane, after the big Indaba at Indaba Zulu, Mzilikazi said the famous words, "How can one son arise when another son is there?" He said, "Can you escort my son back, KwaZulu, because you've now corrupted him, and his frame of mind is no longer there." So Nkulumane left with one small regiment, and they headed straight back to KwaZulu-Natal. But he never arrived at KwaZulu-Natal. He crossed the Limpopo, and when you cross the Limpopo and you're continuing down them in Mpumalanga, you'll come across Rustenburg.
Yes.
And in Rustenburg there, you'll find Nkulumane Road, Nkulumane School, Nkulumane this, Nkulumane that, Nkulumane that. So that is where he ended up settling, and that's where he passed away there.
And there is a tombstone there, isn't there?
There is a tombstone there, yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's there.
All right, so now let's go ahead. Now we're looking at Lobengula. Now, Lobengula, Prince Jandu, and he didn't sound as though he was the slightest bit interested in being king. He was having fun, hunting and doing all sorts of other things. Did he have much training in the court? Was he accepted into the court? What's your impression of as a prince?
As a prince, Inkosi Lobengula, he was there in the royal court. Clearly at that time, he did not have aspirations to be the monarch, to be ruling there. The main reason for that was that he was a sickly child. He was a sickly child. And so when you look at his name, Lobengula, if I break it down to you further, Lo Wayegula. Translated, this one who has been sick.
Okay.
This one who has been sick. Lo Wayegula, Lo Bengula. So he was a sickly child in the court. And by pure coincidence or luck and that likes, he rose up to the forefront when he got his health back and he was there. So he was given little snapshots of the royal court and all those things. But for him, his upbringing was that of a pampered, in a nice way, not in a nasty way, young child who was going to be looked after because he was not well.
Okay. Now, there was some interesting stuff I came across too, and that was about the Liebenberg Trek, because of course, poor Mzilikazi was facing all these people, and Lobengula much more so, all trying to come into the land, and amongst them, of course, was the Treks. And Liebenberg was one Trek who should not have crossed over the river, the Vaal, without talking to the amaNdebele first, but he did. And from that, from what I can read, 3 white children were given to Prince Mzilikazi, to King Mzilikazi, as a present. And I could never understand this. I thought, what an extraordinary thing. And then you heard about Nduna Sam, who was apparently in one of the regiments there. And he was a Griqua, you know, so a white-looking Griqua. But the little girl, Sarah, was apparently given to King Lobengula's mother to look after this little baby. Have you heard that story?
Yes, that story is there. And that story is not a first. It's one of those quirks of our deep history that we have, whereby if someone takes a simplistic view, you will be a fish out of water. Yes. That did happen. That is factual. It was there. And even to that level, it even happened to the Ndweni clan in Nduna going back there as well. So history was repeating itself. So that those children were there, they became part of the nation, they lived amongst the nation, they had families within the nation. And so, yes, they were part and parcel of the nation going forward.
All right, well, let's go forward a little bit further. Did any Ndweni chiefs attend the Indaba, or were they still regaining position after Godwan's death by that stage?
No, they were intrinsic to the Indaba and Indaba Zulu. They were very, very intrinsic indeed. Kondwane was there as well. He hadn't done the deed yet. He was going to do the deed after the Indaba, when the dust settled. But he had to do, as you would expect, any bureaucrat. So that was his main task, to shift aside to sort himself out. So the Ndweni chiefs were there. They were there.
Right.
And they took a very close part of it. As I was saying earlier on, purely because there were so many Ndweni chiefs, it would have been impossible to do the Indaba without them.
Absolutely. One little tiny thing I heard, and that was one of the things at the Indaba that was put forward by the chiefs, was that they really resented the Kalanga people being used as policemen. Have you heard that one?
Yes, that was there as well also. It was one of those things whereby you're trying to build a nation, you're trying to put a nation together. There are sensitivities in both ways to say, how does that come in? And for some of them, they would have been saying, hold on a sec. Yeah. We are the ones who've come all the way from KwaZulu-Natal. Surely we can police ourselves. We cannot allow these Johnny-come-lightlies to police us. How can they?
Okay, it's interesting. When you put some understanding into it, you can understand why, can't you?
Yes, yeah.
All right, so let's move forward again. And I'm going to do some programs talking about the clash of cultures, because it must have been staggering, as staggering for the amaNdebele to see what these white people did, and as staggering for the white people who were fascinated by the amaNdebele people. But everything you read, apart from some really awful, churlish actions, which I have put into my book, there was a good feeling between them. There was an interest from the amaNdebele and an interest from the white people in who the others were. Would you read that, or am I being dramatic about it?
No, Jill, you are being right. You are really being right. And it's nice for us to touch on this issue. When different cultures, different races come together, they are inquisitive of each other. They want to learn about each other. They want to find out things about each other and all those things. So there is a melting pool that very quickly comes into that play. And you can see different nations, different cultures, different races coalescing together in that particular way. It is only when politics comes in that says, okay, let us divide. And that's when you have the undertones coming in of let's point fingers, and more undertones come in. It's them or us, more undertones come in. Those undertones are destructive. They are destructive. For me, it's something that I've always been talking about, whereby I've been saying Zimbabwe is a nation of nations.
It is. Indeed.
We must allow every nation to breathe in Zimbabwe. It is only when we get that we will have a roadmap for our country. But so long as we insist on pointing fingers, rubbing each other the wrong way around, all of us are losers. There's no winner in this. All of us are losers. So, yes, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, well, so we're going to have to achieve a new look altogether to get that forward. Yes. But perhaps we can conduct a separate series about that, if that's all right with you.
Yes, that would be wonderful.
So let's come forward again now to your father, because I remember him with delight as one of my father's pupils. How did he adapt? Now, he would have been one of the first educated within the country, I would think, in a government school rather than a mission, for example.
Yes.
So he was at Cholocho with my father, at Cholocho School, government school. How did he cope with the complete changes? Because they were massive by then.
The changes were huge. But then again, knowing the man, he coped very well indeed. He was gifted in the sense that he could always rationalize things.
Mm.
He could see where the Ndebele nation was coming in. He could also see where the other communities were coming in, and he could balance off both sides, and they both trade on it. And for him, for someone really who was before his time, he had an amazing understanding of the international arena.
He did. He did.
Way back then, he was talking personally with Germany, France, Italy, UK, America. So he could have a helicopter view of what was happening in Zimbabwe and extrapolate it into the international arena.
He was a real statesman. There's no question of that. When your father then became really involved in politics, he was very interested in federation as a concept, wasn't he?
He was indeed. He was indeed. The journey for federation for him was a long journey, because he started at the base by saying, well, okay, how can we rule this country? How can this country be ruled? But since he had traveled so much in Zimbabwe, he traveled the length and breadth of that country through and through, it suddenly dawned on him over time that this is a nation of nations, and one rule does not fit all. That was his main issue. One rule does not fit all. For him, he was saying, look, down here in Matabeleland, yes, we would want to pay the lobolo, the dowry, in cattle, in actual cattle that are moving hoof by hoof. Whereas in some parts of the nation, they would want to pay that dowry in dollars, in cash, that way around. So the idea of federation came from that, i.e., we must allow the nations within Zimbabwe to breathe and to be in charge of their own destiny.
Gosh. And how right he was. He was right.
Yes, very right.
Did he, a very, very awful moment, and again, that's going to come up in these discussions, the Ndebele genocide.
Yes.
How did your father manage that?
It was traumatic. It was traumatic for him because he had only a few years ago, was the genocide started in 1983. So only 3 years prior to that, at Lancaster House Conference, he had said exactly these words. He had said, we are playing with fire. And his caution, his words were there purely because he wasn't sucking things out of the air. He knew that in the bush, Zipra forces were fighting against Zanla forces on a tribal basis. That is factual, and if people don't like to hear that, I'll say pick up any history book of repute. You will find it there in your face.
Yep.
Zipra forces were fighting against Zanla forces on a tribal basis. So if you have that kind of scenario before a conference, during a conference, after a conference, it was 100% a certainty that that was going to happen. And it was a hammer blow. It was a hammer blow to...
Nobody listened. Yeah.
Nobody listened because I think people were euphoric about independence.
Yeah.
They were euphoric about the possibilities. In the United Kingdom, they were saying, finally, the Rhodesian crisis, we've solved it. Maggie Thatcher took that view. So everyone was pushing in one direction to say, let us not deviate from this. Let's go forward. Let's go forward. Let's go forward. No one thought to say, let's push the pause button. Are we going forward or backwards?
Very sad, very sad. And he died in 2011, but my goodness, what a respected man all his life. He was extraordinary.
Very much so, very much so, very much so. A respected man, Jill, and a simple man.
A simple
man. That was the beauty of the whole thing. A simple man, one who you could not entice to deviate
Yeah.
from the right path by material gain.
Well, his son has taken his place. And I would like to just read a little thing to conclude this interview, which I have thoroughly enjoyed despite the breakdown of the internet. So this was at the Chief's Indaba at Domboshawa, which of course had been a huge effort for your father, for Chief Chirao, to get everybody there. And
yes.
in the middle of it all, my father had a heart attack.
Yes.
And it was a desperately dangerous heart attack. The doctor couldn't get in because he couldn't be accredited in time to get through the gates at Domboshawa. So my mother had to try and cope on her own.
Wow.
And I have covered this little piece in my book about them, Beloved African. I just like to read it because we owe you and the Ndiweni family a big debt.
Oh my goodness.
I may not get through it without tears, forgive me, but it is a pretty emotive passage. So this is my mother speaking. Who's there? I asked. It's only me. Chief Kaisa moved into the light. How is Mr. Hammond? Is he very sick? I nodded as a wave of emotion engulfed me. We shared a cup of tea. He looked at me and said, I'll wait here until he is better. My eyes filled and I could not speak. I grasped the chief's hands in silent gratitude for his presence and his support at such a trying time for him. He's allowed no visitors, Chief, but please stay here for as long as you want. I was awake all night. I had to keep on mopping his brow and giving him sips of water. All night watching, wondering, fearing what might happen to the love of my life. I watched as the sky outside the window began to lighten. Hello, Nanny. I looked over at the bed. He was back, conscious, tired, but clear-eyed. I'd love a cup of tea. I was only too thrilled to get him one. I flew to the kitchen. Then I remembered, and I opened the door, and sure enough, the cigarette was still glowing. He speaks, Chief, and he wants a cup of tea. My heart is glad. He took my hand. He will get well again. Please, Nkosi, remember, Mr. Hammond is our father. He is a great teacher. He is loved by all Africans. I wept unashamedly as the now ramrod straight-backed chief took his leave and walked off for another day of trying to get the British government to listen to him. As I took the tea back to John, I saw he was bothered, tossing, turning in agony. This time it was not physical agony. It was that absolute agony of mind. Oh, Nanny, they're not going to listen. Is everything we've worked for going to be in vain? Have we been able to achieve anything at all? He was so upset, on and on. He cried out as I tried to calm him, and I was frightened it would provoke another attack. He settled a little. Very quietly, I told him about Chief Kaisa. I told him that his friend had sat for hours because he hadn't been allowed to see him. I told him what he said. John lay back and smiled. I felt him relax, and he closed his eyes. I saw the tiniest suggestion of a tear slide down his face, and I knew that because of one glowing cigarette in the dark of a troubled night, my beloved African would survive. He lived for another 30 years, Inkosi.
Jill, wonderful.
And if it hadn't been for your father and the love he showed for his friend, he might not have done so.
Wonderful. A wonderful piece, Jill. A wonderful piece, a wonderful piece. And really, when all is said and done, this is what we're talking about. This is exactly what we're talking about.
This is what builds a nation.
This is what builds a nation. All the hotheads, they need to be silenced, pushed to the side. At the end of the day, it's this. This is the food of building nations. Relationships. Relationships which are solid, which are strong, which are truthful. And really, yes, it's a wonderful piece. It's an absolute wonderful piece.
Nkosi, Nthlanthla Ndiweni.
Yes.
Thank you for being part of our new series of Let's Kuluma.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you very much. And please continue to Kuluma. Thank you very much indeed.